Welcome, and thank you all for taking a bit of time out of your busy days to join me here on what I hope to be a very provocative discussion on nutrition. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of story to make this interesting, okay? So imagine you are being given a tour of a research facility, okay? You don't know what the research facility does just yet, but the tour guide starts talking about how this company spends over $30 million per year on research. They employ over 500 scientists, psychologists, and technicians of a wide variety of disciplines. So at first you might be thinking, wow, this is some kind of pharmaceutical industry or some other biomedical laboratory performing research, right? So you walk over to one corner of the research facility. The tour guide describes this piece of equipment. It's worth $40,000. And it studies and simulates the act of chewing. Okay, so this piece of equipment is designed to study the break point of a given food. So what is the break point? A break point is defined as the pressure per square inch that it takes the jaw to break a given food. They're studying corn chips. It turns out that human beings, all of us, prefer a break point of about 4 pounds per square inch. And that leads to a food's maximum desirability, part of the crunch factor. You now realize you're in a top-end scientific research facility owned and operated by Frito-Lays. This is what's going on. So my interest in this, as a naturopath and a nutritionist for the last 13 years, I've helped a lot of people with a wide variety of concerns. And one of the most pervasive concerns out there is the difficulty in choosing to eat healthier types of foods, right? We all know we need to eat about, 3 to 6 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. We've been told we've got to limit our saturated fat consumption, keep processed food down, get more exercise. All of that is very good information, but there's a disconnect. Today, I'd like to talk about how food companies encourage overeating by using 3 key ingredients and how they influence our brain psychology. Those 3 key ingredients are sugar, salt, and fat. So let's start off with the well-known taste bud pleaser, sugar. Okay? We can start with anyone, but we're going to start with that one. Okay, so we have to understand, first and foremost, that our tongue has about 10,000 taste buds, and every single one of them is hardwired to perceive sugar. Okay? To give an example of the addictive quality of sugar, in this book, which is a really good book, written by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Michael Moss, it was just released in February of this year, just about a month and a half ago, he interviews legendary food scientist Mr. Markowitz, Howard Markowitz, who was hired by Dr. Pepper back a couple of decades ago to create a new line of Dr. Pepper beverage product because their sales were dropping. This was a critical time where there was a lot of competition, there still is, in the soda beverage industry. But Dr. Pepper's sales were dropping. So Dr. Pepper hired Mr. Horowitz. The end of his research culminates in a 185-page document where he performed over 3,904 clinical trials using 61 different combinations of sweetening agents and formulas, and out of all of that, he found what he calls the bliss point. The bliss point is that range of sweetness which causes the maximum desirability of that food, causes people to consume it more. Your brain just goes into overdrive. Not enough sugar, people don't come back for it. Too much, same thing. It just overwhelms taste buds. But there is a sweet point, and it's called the bliss point. This bliss point has been calculated very carefully by these food companies in a wide variety of foods. So you think about pizza sauce, you think about spaghetti, bread, crackers. All of processed food that has sugar in it has calculated bliss points, right? This is the area which causes the greatest amount of satisfaction. Now, food industry companies, they use words like craveability, right? Crunch factor. They use the crave factor to describe a food. But it's been well understood in research that sugar excites the same brain pathways that opioid drugs do, morphine and heroin. The same pathways in the brain are excited through the consumption of sugar. And this is no mistake by the food companies, right? This makes it very difficult if we engage, if any of us engage in consuming these foods, we get an immediate pleasure sensation, okay? So, sugar is one of those ingredients that the food companies use to entice us to eat more of their products. Remember, those of you that were here last Friday, that we had our staff meeting, right? Remember we had the biscuits, the Chick-fil-A biscuits. Did any of you realize how sweet the buns were? Like, you think about a biscuit, yeah, you're getting, chicken there, fried chicken, very tasty, but the bun was very sweet. I myself had 2 or 3 that morning, which I normally don't eat those things, and I realized to myself, wow, why is sugar in this food? And it's because the bliss point was calculated. Okay, now it doesn't end there, because we're going to transition this little talk and talk about how fat is used. And fat is very interesting of a food ingredient that is used by the food companies. Fat gives food what is called mouthfeel. You can probably guess what that is, right? Mouthfeel is the feel that food has on your palate. So you think about whenever you bite into a grilled cheese sandwich, Krispy Kreme pizza, the way the cheese oozes down that tongue, that is the mouthfeel. And that excites also the same pleasure reward centers of the brain that I was speaking about earlier. The second thing about fat is how food companies change the absorption rates. Now, this is very interesting because if a food is absorbed before it gets into the stomach, the brain does not recognize the calorie content. Okay? The calorie content of the food is recognized by the body, by the brain, after the food hits the stomach and the intestines. These organs send a signal to the brain, hey, I've just eaten something, and the brain responds, okay, stop eating it, right? There's a natural mechanism to control the hunger response. But if you can get a food to melt in your mouth, and not in your stomach, and not in your hands, guess what's going to happen? Your brain doesn't pick up the calories as effectively. This, in food science, is called the vanishing calorie density of a food. So food scientists are altering the shapes of fat globules, making them in such a way that they can be absorbed quickly through the mouth, so that your brain doesn't recognize the calorie content. Fat has twice as many calories per gram than sugar, and then you continue to eat more. Think about when you've eaten who's eating Cheetos here? Everybody has. I have. It's those cheese puffs, they just melt in your mouth. So your brain is not picking up those calories. It's not even hitting yet the full effect of it is not hitting the stomach. Okay, so those 2 factors in fat are used by the food companies. Furthermore, cheese is being used as an ingredient. It's not just a food anymore. People just don't eat cheese. They eat cheese-infused pizza crusts, or they eat cheese chips or cheese puffs, right? And so you're going to be seeing here in a little bit how much the consumption of cheese has increased, and thus the overall calories. We'll get to that in just a second. The third ingredient that the food companies use to encourage people to eat more is salt. That's right. So salt. What can we say about salt? Salt is a vital nutrient, first and foremost. We cannot live without it, right? Salt, sodium chloride, are part of the body's electrolytes. And electrolytes are the little minerals that help to relay electrical impulses throughout the body. When we become dehydrated, we lose electrolytes, and we can go into shock. So we need salt. We are hardwired also to seek out salt. Problem is, as you're going to be able to see, is that it creates an extremely pleasurable sensation too. Salt, the way the food companies use it, they call it the flavor burst. It is able to quickly send a signal from the tongue to the brain, causing you to reinforce that behavior, leading you to eat more. And salt is very interesting because it can mask a flavor, right? If something is bland, you put salt on it, and guess what? It tastes a lot better. That's right. You can make anything taste better with salt. So it can mask flavors that you don't like, or it can even enhance flavors. If you use salt very wisely, it actually leads to something good. But the way it gets manipulated, these food companies start to alter the shape of the salt itself, right? They use more powdery, softer versions of salt in soups so that it hits the tongue more smoothly. If you look at, like on a pretzel, you'll see these cube-shaped or pyramid-shaped with hard edges and flat sides. That's because the saliva on the tongue will break it down the quickest and then send that flavor burst to the brain. This has all been studied, right? It's all well referenced in The End of Overeating by Dr. David Kessler and that book, Sugar, Salt, and Fat. So the information is out there. So having seen the three main ingredients that these food companies use, having just done a very brief overview, what have been the results in their consumption? So let's talk about that for a little bit. Turns out that compared to 1970, we're eating roughly 3 times the amount of cheese, right? The average American eats roughly about 33 pounds of cheese per year in associated food products, not just cheese as an item, but in food products. 3 times the amount as in 1970. Per day, the average American consumes roughly about 8,500 milligrams of salt, double the recommended daily allowance. And then with sugar, right? Per person, per year, roughly we consume about 71 pounds of sugar. That is the equivalent of 22 teaspoons per day. And sugar in all of its forms, like high fructose corn syrup. We're talking about caloric sweeteners. Okay, so we've seen the trends in history. What is happening now with health? Correlated with this increase in these 3 primary ingredients have been an increase in health concerns. The main one that everybody talks about, that we're trying to get a hold of, is the obesity epidemic, which 2/3 of the nation right now is considered overweight, 1/3 obese. This is a big problem because with the increasing caloric density and the more desirability of these foods, it makes it very difficult for people to actually follow balanced recommendations. So now we've seen the trends. We've seen the 3 major ingredients and how they affect us, right? Not only is there a problem with the obesity epidemic, there's also growing trends in diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. These things are all statistically correlated. So, having understood this, my aim and goal is for all of us and the whole world at large to be a little bit more aware of what's being studied. We are being carefully studied to understand how these foods are affecting us and how food companies are encouraging us to overeat by using calculated amounts of sugar, salt, and fat. Knowing this, we can level the playing field. We know what they're up to, right? We can take a step back and we know, hey, if we're going to consume a little bit of this, know that there's going to be a strong response. That can help us, all of us, make better and more informed decisions in our diet. And especially if we're facing a health concern or we're interested in preventing disease, this information can be quite valuable. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you soon.